formal speech, you'll know today is about the awarding of degrees. You guys are going to get yours this afternoon. Somebody in this room has already received a degree today. So when we appointed Paul as Dean of Chapel, he was most of the way through doing a part-time PhD. Since we appointed him Dean of Chapel, he submitted his submitted his thesis, done his viva, and was eligible to receive his degree from his PhD from the University of Durham today. Unfortunately, he had something else he had to do today, so he's had to receive it in absentia, but it was bestowed on him at 9 o'clock this morning. So can I invite you to congratulate Dr. Paul Dominiak. Okay, to business. As you might expect, after more than 800 years of continuous evolution, some aspects of the ceremony you're about to take part in have become rather arcane. Over the next few minutes, the Praelector and I will try to explain exactly what will soon happen to you and roughly what it all means. The origins of the graduation ceremony are lost in the mist of time. In the 12th century, when the first universities were being set up to rival the monasteries as centres of education and learning, the groups of scholars modelled themselves on the medieval guilds. Guilds, as you may know, were corporations of artisans, craftsmen, merchants and other professions set up to further the interests of their members and to maintain standards. To maintain standards, you can already see a parallel. Members of the medieval guilds progressed through 3 ranks. The lowest was apprentice, next was journeyman, and finally master craftsman. I apologise for the non-gender neutral language. Similarly, as members of the University of Cambridge, you progress through 3 stages. You are now, but not for much longer, in the lowest, corresponding to the apprentices of the guild. You were admitted to this stage when you matriculated at the beginning of your apprenticeship here 3 or 4 years ago, in most cases. In a ceremony in Upper Hall presided over by myself, a ceremony you may now hardly remember. You'll be elevated to the 2nd stage today when you become a BA of the university. The 3rd stage comprises the Master of Arts of the university, corresponding to Master Craftsman of the Guild. To become a master, the medieval guildsman had to produce a masterpiece. The requirements for you to achieve the equivalent status of MA are rather less rigorous. All you have to do is to fill in a form and stay out of prison for 3 years. And I'm not even sure that the latter requirement is still enforced. Each time the guildsman passed to a higher stage, there was an elaborate ceremony, and that pattern is followed for the university. Your graduation ceremony is based on the ceremony in which apprentices became journeymen. The earliest reference to the Cambridge ceremony itself is from the 17th century, and the ceremony then seems to be very much as it is now. The ceremony takes place in the Senate House, which is, and I quote from a guidebook, that handsome Corinthian edifice of Portland stone in the form of a rectangular parallelepiped situated opposite the University Church. You may possibly have noticed it. It was completed in 1730. The ceiling is of white plaster divided into quadrangular compartments, each richly decorated in the Italian style. It is certainly a masterpiece, and I commend it to you if you have a spare moment to look upwards during the ceremony. It is appropriate that your degree is to be conferred in the Senate House, because the Senate House is essentially the source of all your problems. Before the Senate House was built, there were none of those inconvenient examinations which so disrupt the pleasant ebb and flow of student life. There were no examinations because examination papers needed to be read out to the candidates, and there was simply no building in Cambridge large enough to accommodate all the students. Before 1730, students only took one examination for the BA degree, and that was oral. It took the form of a dispute, or wrangle as it was called, between the student and a senior member of the university who sat on a 3-legged stool called the Tripos stool. The students who were most successful disputing or wrangling were called wranglers. With the coming of the Senate House came formal written examinations. In those days, the Senate House was not a comfortable place to sit an exam. There was no heating, and sometimes it was so cold that the ink froze in the inkwells. The term Tripos, so intimately associated with the examination process, was then used to refer to the list of successful candidates, the Tripos list. I have to mention that the Tripos lists were not then determined with the same dispassionate precision that went into your classification. In fact, there was a splendid provision by which the examiners could insert into the list at any position the names of any 4 members of the university of their choice, who did not even have to have sat the examination in question. My predecessor, Dr. Siklos, tells me that there have been occasions in the past, not this year of course, when it would have been rather handy to have had this provision. After some time, quite a lot of time actually, changes in Cambridge tend to happen on geological timescales. The word Tripos itself attached itself to the actual examination, and there it has remained. At first, there was only one Tripos in mathematics, and in fact, the most successful candidates in mathematical Tripos are still called Wranglers. There are some among you here today. It wasn't until 1824 that a second Tripos, namely the classical Tripos, appeaed, but even then you couldn't study for the classical Tripos without having first taken part 1 of the mathematical Tripos. Now there are several tens of Triposes, most of them represented among you. The degree ceremony in the Senate House begins when the Vice-Chancellor's procession enters the building, led by the senior Esquire Bedell carrying a ceremonial mace that was presented to the university in 1626. Time was when the Vice-Chancellor himself conferred degrees solidly for 2 full days. Now the process takes 4 days, but there is a sensible and rather nice arrangement whereby, for each college, the head of house acts as the Vice-Chancellor's deputy. So your degree will be conferred by our master, Professor Ian White. After welcoming visitors, the senior proctor proposes a Latin grace called the collective supplicat. I've asked our Praelector, the Rev'd Dr Paul Dominiak, to recite the grace in Latin, and then for the benefit of parents and other guests listening to the audio relay, to translate it into English.
Supplicant reverentius vestris viri mulieresque quorum nomino juxta senaculum in portico propersuit hodie registrarius nec delevit pro cancellarius ut gradum quisque quem morite petivit asequantur. Those men and women whose names the registry has today posted in the arcade beside the Senate House, and which the Vice-Chancellor has not deleted, beg your reverences that they may proceed to the degree for which each has properly applied.
There is then a short pause to allow any MA of the university to object to the grace by shouting non placet. If there are no objections, the junior proctor says placet, it pleases. If all that passes off smoothly, the Esquire Bedell leads the Vice-Chancellor's deputy to the chair at the front of the dais, and the presentation of graduands begins. The Praelector presents the graduands to the Vice-Chancellor's deputy in groups of 4, each graduand holding one of the 4 fingers on his right hand. Not in a vice-like grip, please. Bear in mind that each praelectorial finger will be gripped at least 40 times today. And in any case, you are only being led 1 pace forward, so there is no need to hang on for dear life. There is no particular significance to the business of the fingers. Originally, the Praelector would have led each graduate forward by the hand. But in these days of mass production of graduates, it is done in batches of 4. The Praelector then says,
Dignissime Domine, Domine pro cancellariae, et tota academia, praesente verbis hunc virum, or if you're a lady, hanc mulierem, quem or quam, scio tam moribus, quam doctrina esse idoneum, or idoneam, ad gradum assequandum, and state your degree, idque tibi fide mea presto, toteque academiae. This translates as, Most worthy Vice-Chancellor and the whole university, I present to you this man, or this woman, whom I know to be suitable as much by character as by learning, to proceed to the degree of, whatever your degree is, for which I pledge my faith to you and the whole university.
Note that the Praelector is vouching not only for your learning, but also for your morals. I cannot imagine that anyone here present today is defective in the latter department, but if there is anything you think the Praelector should know about, you can approach him after this rehearsal. The Esquire Bedell will then call each graduand in turn by name. You step forward and kneel. You place your hands together and advance them cautiously towards the master. The master will then clasp your hands in his and utter the magic formula.
Auctoritate mea commissa, admittu te a gradum. Whatever your degree is, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. By the authority committed to me, I admit you to the degree of, whatever your degree is, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, unless you have asked for that Trinitarian formula to be admitted. After the first group has been presented for the same degree, abbreviated formulae are often used, the Praelector saying, Hos etiam praesento, ed his idem vobis preste. These I also present, and of them I give you the same pledge. And so passes to you the spirit of education and learning that has passed from scholar to scholar, hand to hand, down an unbroken line stretching back through the ages to the beginnings of the university more than 800 years ago. You then rise. I wouldn't say this is an intrinsically dangerous ceremony, but there is at exactly this point an element of risk. As you kneel, your gown will have naturally fallen over the backs of your legs. It is quite likely to get caught on the heel of your shoe. If it is still caught on the heel of your shoe when you try to rise, you will get about halfway up and then find yourselves rotating rapidly about a horizontal axis, causing you to somersault backwards through the air. Those of you who've taken what one might call the premier Tripos, by which I mean engineering of course, will recognise that this is a simple consequence of an unresisted rotational moment. It is inevitable. But I don't want to alarm you unduly. The Praelector will do his best to prevent this happening by unhooking your gown from your heel. Nevertheless, you should yourself exercise care. If the Praelector fails in his unhooking duties, the consequence to him, at worst, is that he will be fined a bottle of port by the proctors. But the consequence to you is that you will find yourself supine on the floor, looking up at the quadrangular compartments of the white plaster ceiling, each richly decorated in the Italian style, while the proctors, the Esquire Bedell, the Vice-Chancellor's deputy, the other graduands and the audience look on. The ceiling, as I've mentioned, is a masterpiece, but there are better moments at which to admire it. Having successfully negotiated this hurdle and arrived in a vertical position, you bow. This bow is important. It is the last formal act you perform before you leave the Senate House and marks both the closure of your undergraduate degree and the start of your life as a graduate. Never mind all those examinations that went a bit wrong, all those supervisions where you were reduced to abject silence, all those times when the ball hit the post, or all those wrong notes you played or sang. A correctly executed bow will draw a veil over all those unhappy memories, and you will leave Cambridge with that comfortable feeling that when it really mattered, you came up with the goods. So you need to rehearse your bow. It is not an extravagant bow from the waist like a pantomime Puss in Boots. Nor is it a jerk of the head of the sort that occurs when you wake up abruptly in a lecture. And it is certainly not a chummy little nod, a prelude to "Yo, master," and a high five. It is a courteous and deferential inclination of the head and shoulders, denoting respect to the Vice-Chancellor's deputy and the great institution he is representing, and an appreciation of the honour just bestowed upon you. The Praelector will now demonstrate the perfect bow, so you need to watch. Did you all see that? This is important, so perhaps I could ask you to demonstrate it again, Praelector. Exactly. The master will acknowledge your bow with a slight nod, a congratulatory nod, a nod that signifies recognition of the fact that you are now a Cambridge BA. In some cases, it may also signify astonishment at this fact, but it is the same nod. You won't be able to tell the difference.
You say nothing at this point, or any other point in the ceremony, even if you know the Latin for thanks very much. Do not be tempted to display your linguistic prowess. Do not disturb the decorum of the Senate House with Sharapova-like exhalations when you execute your bow. And no gestures, please, no punching the air or waving to the crowd. Finally, you make your way to the far right corner of the Senate House, where you will be presented with your degree certificate. You exit through what is called the Doctor's Door into Senate House Passage. I shall be waiting outside to congratulate you and shake your hand. After the last graduand has left the building, one of the Esquire Bedels calls the congregation to order with the words Magistry, Masters. All stand. The Vice-Chancellor's deputy dissolves the congregation with the words Nos dissolvimus hanc congratiationem, and leaves in procession, followed by the Esquire Bedels, the proctors, the pro-proctors, and the university marshal. Others present remain standing until the procession has passed out of the Senate House and may then leave. By this time, you will be waiting for your guests on Senate House lawn, resplendent in, and I hope rightly proud of, your new and well-deserved status as a BA of the University of Cambridge. I'll now hand over to the Praelector for some role play.
I think a round of applause for our senior tutor. So the senior tutor has explained very beautifully using words what's going to happen, but of course it's also very helpful to have a sense of seeing beforehand what is going to happen. So it's going to work through some of the physical movements in the Senate House itself, so you can get a sense of what to expect when you get there. You can see before you a very beautiful red kneeler, because you will, unless you have stated otherwise, be kneeling in front of the deputy for the Vice-Chancellor, in other words, the master. So you have to imagine just seated right here, the chair, the master. You will have been arranged beforehand, immediately after the photograph in fact, into groups of up to 4 people, and that this will be the processional order. It's very, very important to remember where you are exactly once you've been set up in that order, because each degree is conferred not only by subject but by name. So you don't want to be stood there and someone else's name read out. I'm going to now pick some volunteers. In fact, Samantha's shaking her head, so I'm definitely going to have Samantha. And Amelia was laughing, so we'll have Amelia too. Brian and Tim, I'll have you both as well, if you want to come this way. So if we imagine these 4 upstanding virtuous individuals are in the 4s into which they've been arranged. I'm just going to move this lectern a little bit. In the Senate House, you will be in these columns, rows and rows of 4 or lesser numbers stretching out behind you. But as the senior tutor said, when it comes to the admission of degrees, we're called forward, and a particular name of a degree is called, and you will be guided. There is a steward who will tell the first 4 to set off, and you set off forward, and then towards me, who will be stood right just here to the left facing the master. And you have to take my fingers, because I will tow you just about 1 step towards being admitted for your degree. So I will extend the 4 fingers of my right hand. It's very important to remember, if you are the person like Amelia furthest away, you must take my index finger. Then Samantha would take the next finger, Ryan the 3rd, and Tim my little pinky. So if you all want to take a finger, you would just take a step forward, and then you stay holding on to that while I present you for your degree. So just to remind you, Dignissime Domine, Domine pro Cancellare, Tote Academia, Praesente Verbis, has mulieres, et hos viros, quoscio tam maribus, quam doctrina esse idonios, ad gradum a sequendum, baccalaureate in artibus, for example, idque tibi fide mea presto toteque academiae. Then you can let go. You will be called individually by name. So Amelia Oakley. You come forward, and now we're going to practice the kneeling. So you kneel onto the cushion, if you want to.
One or two.
2 knees. And can everyone see that? So you want to kind of plant yourself fairly squarely in the middle. And as you can see, Amelia has the most wonderful, wonderful posture. So you want to straight back. You don't want to sit back onto your heels or slouch, especially because the master does have a dreadfully bad back right now. So you don't want to make him lean forward. Now, since you're supplicating or begging or praying for your degree, you put your 2 hands together at about chest height, just like that. Then the master will grasp them like this and admit you to the degree. Auctoritate mea commissa, admitte te a gradum, baccalaureate in artibus, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Then he will release you. I will have already checked there's no gown, which there isn't. You stand up, take 1 step back, and you bow reverently. And then you will exit the Senate House, which you don't need to do now, Amelia. But there will be only 1 door open in the entire Senate House. You can't go wrong. It's a door that's in, as you look at it, the top right corner of the building. Someone will be stood there, it's the only door open, and you exit. And then you circle into the Senate House gardens and greet, after the ceremony, your loved ones and your supporters. Senior tutor, you may.
Just a suggestion for the thing I said about the toppling backwards is a genuine risk. If you've seen as many degree ceremonies as I have, there are students who are perilously close to that happening. Good hint is when you go to kneel, hold your gown, and then when you kneel down, pull it in, and then raise your hands. Because that pretty much ensures it won't trail over your heels if you pull it into them when you kneel down. That's just a technique point.
And I will be stood down. I will check each of you. If I see that your gown is trailing over, you'll see me scurry to your side and pull it off your heels.
In all seriousness, you want to spare Paul doing that, because while you're kneeling down, having your degree bestowed, there'll be a little click as a photograph is taken, which you can pay an exorbitant price for later, as you receive your Cambridge degree. What you don't want that photograph to have is the Praelector desperately scrabbling around in the background, trying to unhook your gown. So if you can spare him having to intervene at all, that will ensure, if you're willing to pay the price, that your graduation moment photograph is as perfect as it can be.
Our wonderful volunteers can go take their seats again. Thank you. The only other thing I wanted to mention is the processional route. So you state, once you've been arranged into your groups of 4 or fewer, if you're in the first congregation or gathering, I will be leading that procession. If you're in the second, it will be the president. The route will be from First Court up the chimney, turning immediately right into Jesus Lane, walking down Jesus Lane, crossing the road to get to where the Quaker Friends House is, continuing down, cutting through All Saints Passage, turning left into Trinity Street, and from there to the west door of Senate House, where we'll gather and be admitted into the house itself in readiness for your degree being granted. But congratulations all of you. It's going to be a great day. No rain, hurrah.
We hope.
We hope. I'll use my influence.
But were you dean last year?
I was dean last year, but I wasn't Praelector, so I wasn't praying for it, Geoff. Now I get paid to pray for it. That's all from me. I'm going to hand you back to the senior tutor for some final words.
So the rehearsal is over. That's the